Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at some lectures and book excerpts all about conspiracy theories,
Yeah.
specifically the Illuminati.
Oh, yeah. This is going to be fun.
This is a deep rabbit hole.
It is. Yeah, we're dealing with like hidden networks and control over global events and
Yeah.
a lot of historical threads to untangle.
Okay, so let's start with the basics then. Who are the Illuminatis, according to these sources?
Okay, so they paint them as this like top tier group,
Uh-huh.
almost like the puppet masters behind the Freemasons.
Okay.
Their objective world domination, of course.
Of course, always.
How do they plan to do that? Control the finances, the media, the governments.
So not just like shadowy figures in a smoke-filled room making deals?
Not exactly. No, they
Oh, yes.
emphasize that they operate from within.
Right.
Like chameleons blending into the system, infiltrating and subverting, working from the inside out.
Oh, that's creepy.
Right.
It makes you wonder who you can trust. But isn't it a fallacy to assume that, like, anyone who's wealthy or influential must be part of some evil conspiracy?
Yeah, that's a great point. Correlation doesn't equal causation.
Right,
Just because someone is powerful doesn't mean they're evil.
right.
But these sources, they present a very specific narrative.
Okay.
They actually draw this fascinating connection between the Illuminati and a 17th century Jewish movement led by Sabbatai Zevi.
Oh, yeah. Wasn't that the guy who claimed to be the Messiah and then converted to Islam?
That's the one
Very
gets
cool.
even wilder
Okay.
with his successor, Jacob Frank.
Okay.
This movement rejected traditional Jewish law,
Hmm.
embraced what they called sin, and they basically just wanted to like shake society to its core. The sources suggest that this ideology, this desire to disrupt, laid the groundwork for all the manipulative tactics that are attributed to the Illuminati.
Okay.
They see a direct line from Zevi to modern-day conspiracies.
Oh, no, that seems like a huge jump to make.
It is.
Are they saying that, like, a 17th century religious movement is responsible for the current state of the world? Like, how do they even back that up?
Well, that's where we need to be careful. The sources present these connections as claims, not necessarily proven facts.
Okay.
It's up to us to kind of sift through the information and decide what makes sense.
All right, let's get into some specifics, because these sources list a ton of historical events that they claim were orchestrated by the Illuminati,
Yep.
revolutions, world wars, the creation of the UN, even the assassination of JFK. It's like they're saying nothing happens by chance.
Right. The scope of their alleged influence is pretty wild.
It's huge, yeah.
And, that all-seeing eye on the dollar bill.
Yeah,
Well, according to these sources, that's not just a random symbol.
right.
It's a clue that they're hiding their influence in plain sight.
So they're everywhere controlling everything.
Yeah.
But why? What's the motivation behind all this manipulation? What do they stand to gain?
I mean, that's where the psychology of these theories gets really interesting. Like, why do people believe these things? What need does it fulfill to think that there's this secret group pulling the strings?
Yeah.
Is it a way to make sense of a chaotic world? To find someone to blame?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
And it leads us to a delicate topic that these sources address.
Yeah.
The Jewish question. I know this is sensitive territory, so I want to make it clear that we're simply presenting the information as it is in the sources, not endorsing any viewpoint.
Right, of course.
So,
Yeah, it's important to approach this with nuance and avoid stereotypes.
yes, absolutely.
The sources present a whole spectrum of perspectives.
Okay.
Some claim that the entire conspiracy is Jewish in nature. They point to figures like the Rothschilds and their wealth as evidence. Others make a distinction between so-called satanic Jews like the Sabbateans
Right.
and regular Jewish people,
Yeah.
saying that there's a difference.
Okay.
They also claim that the Illuminati actually hate religious Jews.
Really?
Yeah, because of their historical opposition to the occult.
Wow, okay. It's a lot to unpack here.
It is.
I'm wondering if we need a whole separate deep dive just to explore the different perspectives on this.
That's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
It really speaks to the complexity of these conspiracy theories and how they blend historical narratives, religious beliefs, and social anxieties into this like single overarching explanation.
Right. Okay, so assuming for a moment that there is some truth to these claims, how do the Illuminati actually control society? What are their tools and tactics?
So the sources focus on three main areas:
Okay.
media and education, social engineering,
Okay.
and of course financial control.
The classic.
Essentially, they argue that the Illuminati have their fingers in every pie.
Okay, let's break those down. What do they mean by media and education control?
They're basically saying that the Illuminati use propaganda and brainwashing techniques.
Okay.
to shape public opinion and control the flow of information. They even suggest that some dissenting voices are actually controlled opposition.
Oh, wow.
Designed to create the illusion of debate.
So even people who seem like they're challenging the status quo could actually be part of the conspiracy.
That's the claim.
That's wild.
Yeah, it all ties back to this idea of like a master plan, a grand scheme where everything is orchestrated to benefit their goals.
That's chilling.
Yeah. It makes you wonder if we have any control over our own thoughts and beliefs.
Right. What about social engineering then?
This is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
They argue that movements like feminism, diversity, sexual liberation are actually tools used by the Illuminati to break down traditional structures and create a more malleable population.
So they're saying that these movements, which are often seen as positive forces for change, are actually part of some evil plot.
Yeah, that's how they frame it.
That seems far-fetched.
Well, remember, we're exploring a very specific worldview here. They see the world through a particular lens, one that interprets events very differently than mainstream narratives.
Okay, so financial control, how does that fit into the plan?
This is where the Rothschilds and other powerful banking families come back into the picture.
Okay.
The sources claim that the Illuminati manipulate the economy, creating booms and busts, using debt as leverage, all to consolidate their power and wealth.
So they're using money to control the world? I mean, that's not a new idea.
Right.
People have been suspicious of bankers forever.
Exactly. These theories often draw upon existing fears and anxieties, tapping into those deep-seated beliefs about who holds power and how they use it.
Okay, speaking of powerful figures, we can't ignore the protocols of the Elders of Zion.
Oh, yeah.
Which is mentioned throughout these sources, that infamous document that supposedly outlines a Jewish plan for world domination.
Yeah, the protocol's a fascinating example of how these theories can really take on a life of their own, regardless of their origins.
So are the protocols real or fake?
Well, that's a debate that's been going on for decades.
Yeah.
The sources present both sides of the argument, highlighting claims of plagiarism from other texts, while also pointing out counter-arguments that defend its authenticity.
It seems like whether it's real or not, it plays a pretty significant role in these conspiracy theories.
Yeah, it definitely feeds into the narrative they're building.
Right.
Reinforcing that idea that there's this secret group.
Right.
Working behind the scenes.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have.
But it feels like we're just scratching the surface.
Oh, yeah?
These sources are dense.
Yeah, there's a lot here.
We could spend hours unpacking each claim.
Absolutely.
I think it's time for a break.
Yeah, let's let the listener process all this.
We'll pick up where we left off in part 2 of this deep dive.
Sounds good.
Until then, listener, think about what stood out to you from this conversation.
Yep.
Do you see any connections to current events? Do you find any of these claims convincing?
Good questions to think about.
We'll delve deeper into the Illuminati's alleged plans for the future in the next part. Right.
So stay tuned.
Can't wait.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of the Illuminati.
Back at it.
We just laid out a lot of their history and tactics, but these sources go even further.
Oh, yeah. They dive deeper into specific events. They start pointing fingers at people.
Oh.
Weaving this complex web of influence and power.
Okay, this is where things start to feel like a spy thriller.
I know, right?
Secret societies, hidden agendas, powerful families pulling strings.
All behind the scenes.
Yeah, exactly.
One recurring theme in these sources is this idea that the Illuminati thrives on chaos and conflict.
Really?
Yeah, like they need the world to be in a constant state of turmoil.
Why would they want things to be messed up?
Well, because control.
Okay.
By creating or manipulating these crises, they can swoop in and offer solutions.
Okay.
But those solutions ultimately benefit their agenda.
Oh, so it's like they create the problem so they can be the heroes.
Exactly.
But their solution is just them getting more power.
Right.
That's cynical. It is. And they even take it a step further.
Oh, okay.
Suggesting that wars are sometimes orchestrated as like offerings to Lucifer.
Hold on. Human sacrifices to Lucifer.
That's what they say.
Are we talking actual rituals or is this more symbolic?
They describe actual sacrifices.
Wow.
But again, it's hard to say how much of this is rooted in reality versus symbolic interpretations.
Okay. So who are the players in this conspiracy then?
Yeah, so the Rothschilds come up a lot.
Of course they do.
They're almost like the poster children.
Right, because of their wealth and their influence.
Exactly.
Are they really saying that, like, the entire Rothschild family across generations is
Yeah.
in on this?
That's the claim. They really dive deep into these genealogies and family ties,
Okay.
tracing the lineage of the Illuminati back through centuries.
Okay, this is starting to sound like a Dan Brown novel.
I know, right.
Secret societies, bloodlines, the Da Vinci Code.
And speaking of secret societies,
Yeah.
Freemasonry is mentioned constantly. They portray the Illuminati as this hidden top-level branch of Freemasonry.
So a secret society within a secret society.
Exactly. And you can see why Freemasons would be so attractive to these conspiracy theorists.
Right.
All their rituals and symbols.
Yeah, it's shrouded in secrecy.
Right. So it's easy to imagine all sorts of nefarious things going on.
Okay, so are these theories just focused on historical figures, or do they connect to the present day?
Oh, they connect to the present day.
Okay.
They analyze modern political figures and events through this lens,
Okay.
claiming that many leaders are either knowingly or unknowingly serving the Illuminati's agenda.
So even today, the Illuminati is actively manipulating world events.
According to these sources, yes.
Wow. Okay, so if they are as powerful as these sources say, what are their tools? How do they do all this?
Well, we talked about financial control
Right.
and media and education,
Mm-hmm.
but they also go into some more insidious tactics like mind control.
Mind control, as in, like, they can control people's thoughts.
The sources claim they use various techniques, subliminal messaging propaganda, even advanced technologies.
All right, now that's getting into science fiction.
I know.
Is there any evidence to support these claims?
It's important to remember that these theories rely on speculation and interpretation,
Right.
more than hard evidence.
Yeah, they connect dots that might not be related.
Exactly. And they often make leaps in logic.
Right.
What was that other thing you mentioned?
The manipulation of language?
Oh, right, yes. They argue that the Illuminati deliberately uses specific words and phrases
Okay.
to shape public perception
Mm-hmm.
and control the narrative.
They're like playing mind games with us.
In a way, they believe that language is this powerful tool,
Yeah.
and whoever controls the language controls the thoughts of the masses.
So it's not just about controlling events.
Right.
It's about controlling how we think about events.
Exactly. And it's not just language.
Okay.
They also talk about the manipulation of symbols,
Okay.
how they hide messages in plain sight.
Like hidden messages and logos?
Yes, they analyze all kinds of symbols and logos,
Uh-huh.
interpreting them as evidence of the Illuminati's presence.
Like what?
Well, they often point to the all-seeing eye on the dollar bill
Right.
or the pyramid on the back of the Great Seal
Okay.
as proof of the Illuminati's involvement in, like, the creation of America.
It's like a secret code that only they can decipher.
It does sound a bit like a treasure hunt, right?
It does.
Searching for clues?
Right. But these interpretations are often subjective.
They are?
Just because someone sees a symbol and gives it meaning
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that's the real meaning.
Right. It's important to approach these interpretations with a critical eye.
So we've talked about finances, media language, symbols.
Right.
Is there anything else?
Well, they also go into their alleged connections to the occult,
okay.
various mystical traditions.
Wait.
They claim that the Illuminati draws upon ancient knowledge and practices,
Uh-huh.
like Kabbalah.
Isn't that Jewish?
It is.
Okay.
And they suggest that the Illuminati has twisted these traditions for their own purposes.
This is where things get really tricky.
I know.
We're dealing with sensitive religious beliefs here.
Yeah, it's important to be careful not to perpetuate stereotypes.
Right. We're just presenting the information.
Right.
Not endorsing or condemning anything.
Okay, so where do we go from here?
Yeah.
Well, there's still more to unpack.
Okay.
They talk about the Illuminati's connection to communism
Uh-huh.
and their plans for the future.
Right.
But I think we should pause here.
Yeah. Let the listener process all of this.
There's a lot here.
It really is. We'll pick up where we left off in part 3 of this deep dive.
Sounds good.
Until then, keep thinking about what you've heard so far. All right, welcome back to the final part of our Illuminati deep dive.
Here we are.
We've covered the origins, their methods, some of the key players. Mm-hmm. But these sources don't stop there.
No, they don't.
They take us down a path that leads to a pretty unsettling vision of the future.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting and honestly a bit disturbing. These sources, they paint a pretty bleak picture of what's to come.
Okay, listener, brace yourself. Because what these sources are suggesting about the future is intense.
It is.
Are we talking World War III, global enslavement, satanic New World Order?
All of that.
Okay.
They describe a future where the Illuminati's control is much more open and obvious,
Right.
ultimately leading to a global totalitarian state.
Wow.
Imagine a world where your freedoms are crushed, dissent is silenced, and humanity is basically enslaved by this powerful elite.
It's like something out of a dystopian novel.
Right.
1984, Brave New World.
Yeah, exactly.
But how do they plan to get there? What are the steps involved in this takeover?
Well, they claim the Illuminati is working towards this right now.
Okay.
Manipulating events, creating conflicts to set the stage for their rise to power.
Okay.
One major element that they talk about is this predicted war between Zionists and Muslims.
Oh, wow.
Which they believe is being engineered to destabilize the Middle East.
So they're saying that this conflict, which has been going on for decades, is actually being manipulated to create more chaos.
Right. And the idea is that the Illuminati will then step in as the peacemakers.
Okay.
Offering solutions that give them more control.
So it's divide and conquer.
Exactly. On a global scale.
That's scary.
It is. So what comes after they've created all this chaos?
Yeah.
Well, a global police state.
Oh, wow.
Think widespread surveillance, militarized law enforcement.
Right.
Gradual erosion of civil liberties.
It'll be presented as necessary for security.
Exactly.
To combat terrorism.
Right.
But its real purpose is control.
Control.
Yeah.
It's scary how easily fear can be used to justify those measures.
Yeah, people give up their freedoms for security.
Exactly. And the sources suggest that the Illuminati will exploit that.
Right. And it's not just physical control.
No.
They also talk about like the spiritual implications.
Yes. They claim that the Illuminati is working to usher in a satanic new world order.
Okay, hold on. We've been talking about political manipulation, economic manipulation. Now we're getting into spiritual warfare.
Right. Well, remember, these theories often blend political, social, and religious ideas.
Right.
They see the Illuminati as not just a worldly threat, but a spiritual enemy.
Okay, so it's a pretty dark vision.
It is.
Not a lot of hope here. Do they offer any solutions? Is there any way to stop this?
Well, they highlight individuals and groups that they say are fighting against the Illuminati.
Okay.
Trying to expose their secrets and disrupt their plans.
So there's hope.
According to them, yes.
Okay.
The key is awareness and knowledge.
Okay.
They urge people to question everything, seek out alternative information,
right,
and develop critical thinking skills.
So we can't be manipulated.
Exactly. It's about empowering yourself.
Right, taking control.
And they also emphasize spiritual growth and connection.
Okay.
Believing that strengthens us.
Yeah.
Makes us more resilient.
So what does this all mean for our listener?
That's the big question.
After this deep dive.
Yeah, are we just pawns in some game?
Right.
It's important to remember we've been exploring one interpretation.
Right.
A worldview that sees the Illuminati as the cause of a lot of problems.
We've tried to present the information objectively.
Yes.
Without taking sides.
Of course.
It's up to the listener to decide.
Exactly.
What do they believe?
The key takeaway isn't necessarily to accept or reject these theories.
Right.
It's about cultivating that skepticism, questioning the narrative.
Always seeking the truth.
Exactly. It's about being aware of the potential for manipulation.
Right.
But not letting fear control us.
Yeah. So there you have it, listener.
Your deep dive into the Illuminati.
We've explored their history, their methods, their goals, their predicted future.
A fascinating and often unsettling journey.
It has been.
Hopefully it's left you with more questions than answers.
And as always, we encourage you to continue exploring.
Yes.
Read, research, question, stay curious.
Keep diving deeper.
Until next time.